My name is Hannah, and I am 28 years old. As I stand here outside this grand mansion on a warm summer evening, I can still feel the crumpled $20 bill in my hand. My own parents just threw it at my face in front of dozens of strangers. 3 years ago, they won the lottery and everything changed. Tonight, they will realize the biggest mistake of their lives. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that money should never change who we are as a family. Growing up in the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, my family lived in a modest 2-bedroom house with peeling paint on the shutters and a front porch that creaked whenever you stepped on the third board from the left. My father, Gary, worked as a plumber for over 25 years. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard labor, but those same hands were always gentle when he hugged me goodnight. I remember watching him come home after long shifts, his work boots covered in mud, his clothes smelling of copper pipes and honest sweat. Despite his exhaustion, he never failed to ask me about my day at school, sitting beside me at our tiny kitchen table while Mom prepared dinner. My mother, Diane, worked as a cashier at the local supermarket. She stood on her feet for 8 hours a day, scanning groceries and making small talk with customers who barely acknowledged her existence. Every evening, she would bring home items that were close to their expiration dates, things the store was going to throw away anyway. Dented cans of soup-day-old bread, produce with small bruises that most people would overlook. She transformed these rejected ingredients into meals that tasted like love. I never felt poor growing up because my parents filled our home with something money could not buy. Every Friday night without exception, we had what we called Pizza Friday. Dad would knead the dough himself, flour dusting his forearms, while Mom chopped vegetables, and I grated cheese until my arms ached. We could not afford delivery pizza from the fancy places in town, but our homemade version was better than anything I have ever tasted since. The three of us would crowd around our small kitchen music, playing from an old radio that only picked up 2 stations clearly. We would laugh at Dad's terrible jokes, and Mom would pretend to be annoyed, but could never hide her smile. Those Friday nights taught me that happiness has nothing to do with what is in your bank account. My parents instilled in me values that shaped who I am today. They always told me that money cannot buy happiness. Family is everything. Hard work is the only path worth taking. I believe them with my whole heart because I saw them live these principles every single day. When neighborhood kids teased me for wearing secondhand clothes, my mother would hold me close and whisper that material things fade, but character lasts forever. When I wanted the newest toys that all my classmates had, my father would take me to the library instead, showing me that imagination costs nothing but offers everything. I excelled in school, not because I was naturally gifted, but because I understood the sacrifices my parents made for me. Every good grade was my way of honoring their hard work. I watched my mother skip meals so I could have seconds. I saw my father repair his own shoes with duct tape rather than buy new ones. Their love was written in every sacrifice, every choice they made to put me first. When I received a full scholarship to Carnegie Mellon University for software engineering, my father cried for the first time I had ever seen. He held my acceptance letter like it was made of gold, reading it over and over. My mother baked a cake that night using our finest ingredients, which in our house meant actual butter instead of margarine. College was challenging, but I worked hard just as my parents had taught me. I took on part-time jobs during semesters and full-time positions during summers. I tutored other students, worked in the campus library, and even cleaned offices on weekends. Every dollar I earned beyond my basic needs went home to my parents. They protested at first, insisting I keep the money for myself, but I refused. How could I enjoy luxuries when they were still wearing the same clothes from a decade ago? After graduation, I landed a position at a respected tech company in Pittsburgh, earning $80,000 a year. It felt like a fortune to someone who grew up counting pennies. Each month, I sent $2,000 home to my parents. They deserved so much more, but it was what I could afford while maintaining my own modest apartment. My mother called me crying the first time she received my deposit, telling me I was too generous, that I should save for my own future. But I remembered every dented can of soup, every patched pair of jeans, every sacrifice they had made. This was the least I could do. With my first real bonus, I bought my mother a winter coat from an actual department store, not the thrift shop she had frequented my entire life. She wore it everywhere, telling anyone who would listen that her daughter had bought it for her. Sunday dinners became our sacred tradition. No matter how busy my work week had been, I drove the 45 minutes to their little house every Sunday afternoon. We would cook together just like the old days, though now I could contribute ingredients that did not come from the clearance bin. Dad would tell his same corny jokes, and Mom would fill me in on all the neighborhood gossip. Those afternoons were the highlight of my week. My boyfriend Marcus often joined us, and my parents adored him immediately. He was a high school teacher earning a modest salary, but they never once questioned his worth. They saw what I saw, a kind, genuine man who loved me for who I was, not what I could offer him. We talked about the future during those Sunday dinners. Marcus and I had been dating for 2 years, and we both knew marriage was in our future. My parents promised to host our wedding in their backyard, a small, intimate gathering of people who truly mattered. Mom was already collecting recipes for the food she would prepare herself. Dad was planning to build a wooden arch for us to stand under during our vows. These plans filled me with warmth. I had everything I ever wanted: a career I was proud of, a man who loved me completely, and parents who supported every choice I made. Life felt perfect in its simplicity. One evening, as I helped my mother wash dishes after dinner, she paused and looked at me with tears in her eyes. She took my soapy hands in hers and said something I will never forget. She told me I was her greatest pride, not because of my success or my career, but because I had a good heart. She said she knew I would do great things not for money or fame, but because I genuinely cared about making the world better. I hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender perfume mixed with kitchen spices. I had no idea those words would become a haunting reminder of the mother I would soon lose, not to death, but to something far more insidious. 3 years before that fateful night at the mansion, my life changed in ways I never could have anticipated. I was sitting at my desk at work reviewing code for an upcoming project deadline when my phone rang. My mother's name flashed across the screen, and I answered casually, expecting her usual midday check-in. Instead, I heard sobbing so intense that I could barely understand her words. My heart dropped into my stomach. I immediately assumed the worst. Was Dad hurt? Had something happened to the house? 1,000 terrible scenarios raced through my mind in the seconds it took for her to catch her breath. When she finally spoke clearly, her words made no sense at first. She kept repeating the same phrase over and over: "We won." I asked her what she meant, my confusion growing with each passing second. Then my father's voice came on the line, steadier, but still trembling with emotion. He explained that they had purchased a Powerball ticket on a whim using the birthdate numbers of everyone in our family. The numbers had matched. They had won. The jackpot was $42 million, which after taxes came to approximately $12 million. I sat in stunned silence, my half-eaten lunch forgotten on my desk. This could not be real. My father assured me it was very real. They had already verified the ticket 3 times. They were going to the lottery office the next morning. His voice cracked as he said something that I clung to desperately in the months that followed. He said our lives would change, but our family would remain the same. We had built something beautiful over 28 years, and no amount of money could alter that foundation. I believed him. Why would I not believe the man who had taught me everything I knew about integrity and love? I told them I was happy for them, that they deserved this after all their years of struggle. I meant every word. The first few months after the lottery win felt like a dream. My parents paid off their mortgage and then paid off mine as well, despite my protests. They bought a new car to replace their 15-year-old sedan that had been held together by hope and duct tape. They took their first real vacation, a cruise to the Bahamas that my mother had dreamed about for decades. I accompanied them to the airport, watching my parents giggle like teenagers as they showed me their matching luggage sets. It was adorable. It was wholesome. It was the last time I recognized them completely as the people who had raised me. The changes began subtly, so gradually that I did not notice them at first. My mother started visiting a high-end salon regularly, transforming her simple graying bob into highlighted and styled perfection. She traded her thrift store wardrobe for designer labels I had only seen in magazines. When I complimented her new look during one of our Sunday dinners, she responded with a criticism I was not expecting. She looked at my own outfit, a simple blouse and jeans I had owned for years, and asked why I did not dress better now that I could afford to. The question stung, but I brushed it off. She was just excited about her new lifestyle, I reasoned. She would settle down eventually. My father's transformation was equally dramatic. He purchased a Cadillac Escalade and joined an exclusive golf club that had a waiting list stretching years into the future. Money apparently could shorten that wait considerably. He began spending his days on the green, networking with businessmen and local celebrities. Our Sunday dinners started getting postponed because he had important meetings or social obligations. When I called him one Wednesday just to chat, he cut the conversation short, explaining that he was meeting some very important new friends for drinks. The phrase "very important" stuck in my mind long after he hung up. Since when did my father rank people by their importance? 6 months after the lottery win, my parents announced they were selling our childhood home. The house where I had taken my first steps, where we had celebrated every birthday and holiday, where Pizza Friday had been a sacred ritual for over 2 decades. They had purchased a mansion in Sewickley Heights, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the Pittsburgh area. I helped them pack, holding back tears as I wrapped our old family photos in newspaper. My mother noticed my emotion and patted my shoulder dismissively. She said it was just a house and that we needed to upgrade to something appropriate for our new status. Our new status. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. The last Pizza Friday we ever had together happened in that old house surrounded by moving boxes. I suggested it, hoping to recapture some of the magic before we said goodbye to those walls forever. My father agreed reluctantly, checking his phone repeatedly throughout the process. My mother complained that the flour was getting on her new manicure. We made the pizza, but it tasted different somehow, though I used the same recipe we had perfected over decades. There was no music from the old radio. There were no terrible jokes or fake annoyance. We ate in near silence, my parents discussing their new furniture deliveries, while I watched helplessly as another piece of my childhood died. That was 2.5 years ago. We have never made pizza together since. The distance between us grew wider with each passing month. My parents became increasingly absorbed in their new social circle, wealthy families, and successful entrepreneurs who had never known struggle. They attended galas and charity events, not because they cared about the causes, but because being seen was paramount. My mother joined a book club with women who drove cars that cost more than my annual salary. My father invested in real estate ventures, with partners whose names appeared in business magazines. They climbed the social ladder with desperate determination, as if their past poverty was a stain they needed to scrub away completely. And in their quest to reinvent themselves, they began to view me as a reminder of everything they wanted to forget. The phone calls became less frequent. When we did speak, the conversations felt strained and superficial. My mother would update me on her latest spa treatments or shopping trips. My father would boast about his investment returns or his improving golf handicap. Neither of them asked about my work, my relationship with Marcus, or my life in general. I became an afterthought, a checkbox on their weekly to-do list. Call Hannah. Done. Move on. The realization crept up slowly, but once I acknowledged it, I could not unsee the truth. The parents I had known and loved for 25 years were gone. Strangers had taken their place, strangers who wore their faces but shared none of their values. One particularly painful moment occurred when I overheard my mother talking to one of her new friends on the phone. She did not know I had arrived early for a rare Sunday dinner at their new mansion. I walked through the massive foyer past sculptures I did not recognize, and furniture too pristine to be comfortable following the sound of her voice to the sunroom. I was about to announce myself when I heard my name. My mother was saying that I was still stubbornly working a regular job, as if describing an embarrassing medical condition. She said she had tried to convince me to aim higher, but I seemed content with mediocrity. Her friend laughed in response. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart shattering with each cruel word. I left before she saw me driving home in a blur of tears. The rejection of my life choices became more explicit as time went on. My mother began openly criticizing my career, questioning why I continued working when I could simply live off their generosity. She did not understand that I had built my career with my own hands, that my accomplishments were a source of pride, not shame. To her, working had become something only poor people did, and we were not poor anymore. When I explained that I loved my job, that it gave me purpose and fulfillment, she waved her hand dismissively. She said I was being foolish, that I needed to learn to enjoy life now that we had the means. Her definition of enjoying life apparently meant spending money I had not earned on things I did not need. My father's disdain for Marcus became impossible to ignore. After 2 years of warmly welcoming my boyfriend into our home, he suddenly viewed Marcus as beneath our family. During one uncomfortable dinner at the mansion, my father pulled me aside and suggested I reconsider the relationship. He said Marcus was just a teacher with no real future. He implied that I could do better now that there were plenty of wealthy, eligible men in their social circle who would be thrilled to date me. I stared at him in disbelief, unable to reconcile his words with the father who had taught me that character matters more than wealth. The hypocrisy was staggering. My mother took a more direct approach. She began arranging not-so-subtle introductions to sons of her new wealthy friends. The most persistent attempt involved a young lawyer named Bradley Thornton, whose family had been wealthy for generations. My mother invited him to dinner, without telling me, seating us next to each other and spending the entire evening listing his accomplishments. Bradley was polite enough, but his arrogance was apparent in every word he spoke. He talked about his luxury car, his vacation home in the Hamptons, his connections to powerful people. Not once did he ask about me, my interests, or my life. He was there to be admired, not to connect. When I firmly rejected Bradley and reiterated my commitment to Marcus, my father exploded in a way I had never witnessed before. He said I did not understand anything. He said that we were in a different class now, and that I needed someone worthy of our new status. I asked him what made Marcus unworthy. Was it because he dedicated his life to educating young people? Was it because he measured his success in the lives he impacted, rather than the dollars in his account? My father had no answer. He simply shook his head and walked away, muttering about ungrateful children who refused to accept good advice. Marcus knew everything, of course. I could not hide my tears after those painful encounters. He held me through the worst nights, whispering reassurances that his love for me had nothing to do with my family's money. He said he had fallen in love with me when I was the daughter of a plumber and a cashier, and no lottery win could change that. His family embraced me without reservation. His mother, Linda, a retired nurse with warm eyes and a gentle voice, taught me to bake her famous apple pie. His father, Robert, a mechanic who still worked on cars in his spare time, told jokes that actually made me laugh. They never once mentioned wealth or status or social climbing. The holiday season brought more heartbreak. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year, a celebration of family and tradition. I arrived at my parents' mansion with homemade gifts, just as I had done every year of my life. I had baked cookies using my grandmother's recipe, spent hours decorating them by hand. I had created a photo frame collage featuring pictures from throughout our lives together, from my baby photos to recent snapshots. These gifts represented our history, our journey, our unbreakable bond. At least that is what I believed. My mother opened my gifts with visible disappointment that she did not even attempt to hide. She held up the photo frame and sighed dramatically. She said we had money now, that I did not need to make things by hand anymore. She said it like handmade gifts were something shameful relics of a past best forgotten. My father nodded in agreement. He reached into his wallet and pulled out an envelope containing $5,000 in cash. He pushed it across the table toward me, telling me to buy myself something nice, something appropriate for someone in our position. I refused the money, explaining that I did not need it, that I was happy with my life exactly as it was. They exchanged a look that I can only describe as pity mingled with contempt. The photo frame I had so carefully crafted, selecting each picture with love, choosing colors that matched my parents' bedroom decor, that frame never hung on any wall. A month later, during another visit, I noticed it in a box near the garage. The box was labeled for donation. My heart broke all over again. They were giving away our memories like they were garbage. Everything we had shared meant nothing to them now. The people in those photos, the happy family laughing through poverty and struggle, those people had been replaced by hollow versions obsessed with appearances. I took the frame home with me. It hangs in my living room now, a reminder of who we used to be. Marcus proposed on a crisp autumn afternoon in the park where we had our first date. He had packed a picnic with all my favorite foods. The leaves were changing colors around us, painting the world in shades of amber and gold. As the sun began to set, he got down on one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring with a modest diamond, nothing extravagant but perfect in its simplicity. He had saved for 6 months to buy it, putting aside a portion of every paycheck while still paying his bills and student loans. The ring represented sacrifice and commitment and genuine love. I said yes before he finished asking the question. I called my parents that evening, hoping against hope that this milestone might bridge the chasm between us. Marcus sat beside me, holding my hand as I dialed. My mother answered on the 4th ring, her voice carrying the distant warmth of someone attending to an obligation rather than receiving exciting news. When I told her Marcus had proposed, and I had said yes, there was a long pause. Her first question was about the ring, specifically how many carats the diamond was. Not congratulations, not expressions of joy, just an assessment of monetary value. My father's response was equally deflating. He asked if I was sure I did not want more time to think, mentioning once again that Bradley was still available. Planning the wedding became an exercise in managing expectations. Marcus and I wanted something small and meaningful, perhaps 50 guests at most, people who genuinely loved us and supported our union. I imagined an outdoor ceremony in a garden, homemade food, prepared by people who cared, dancing under string lights as the night embraced us. When I described this vision to my mother, she recoiled as if I had suggested getting married in a garbage dump. She insisted that if they were going to participate, the wedding needed to be worthy of their social standing. 200 guests minimum, an upscale venue, catering from the best restaurants. She was planning a spectacle for her friends, not a celebration for her daughter. I stood my ground despite the pressure. This was my wedding, mine, and Marcus is not a stage for my parents to flaunt their wealth. When I refused to compromise on our vision, my mother delivered an ultimatum. She said if we insisted on having a cheap little ceremony, I should not expect their friends to attend. She said people would think they were being stingy, that it would reflect poorly on the family name. I listened in disbelief. The family name. We were Whitmore from Pittsburgh, descendants of coal miners and factory workers. Our name came from generations of honest hard work, not from lottery tickets and social pretension. But my mother had rewritten our history in her mind, erasing everything that came before money. I asked my father if he would walk me down the aisle. It was a simple request, one that daughters have made of their fathers for generations. His response was non-committal. He said he would try to make time, but he could not promise anything because his schedule was very demanding. Make time for his only daughter's wedding. I hung up the phone and cried in Marcus's arms. He stroked my hair and reminded me that we did not need anyone's approval to build our life together. His parents had already offered to help with everything from setting up chairs to preparing food. His mother had even offered to sew my wedding dress if I wanted something truly personal. I had found a family that valued me even if it was not the family I was born into. The months leading up to the wedding were marked by silence from my parents. They did not call to offer help or ask about preparations. They did not inquire about the date or the location or the details. I sent them an invitation anyway, hand-addressed with careful penmanship, hoping that the tangible object might remind them of their obligations. There was no response. Not a phone call, not a card, not even a text message acknowledgement. I began to accept that my wedding would happen without them, that I would walk down the aisle alone or on the arm of someone who actually wanted to be there. The night before my original wedding date, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote my parents a letter. I poured my heart onto those pages explaining how much I still love them despite everything, how much their absence would hurt, how much I wish things could return to the way they were before money poisoned our relationship. I wrote about pizza Fridays and Sunday dinners, and the winter coat I had bought for my mother. I wrote about my father's calloused hands, and my mother's lavender perfume, and the values they had instilled in me. I wrote that I did not care about their money, that I would trade every dollar they had won to get my real parents back. I mailed the letter the next morning. I never received a reply. During this painful period, I found myself drawing closer to Marcus's family. His mother, Linda, became the maternal figure I desperately needed. She listened without judgment as I poured out my frustrations and grief. She shared her own stories of family difficulties, reassuring me that I was not alone in navigating complicated relationships. Her kitchen became my refuge, filled with the aroma of baking bread and unconditional acceptance. She taught me that family is not solely determined by blood, but by the choices people make to show up for each other day after day, especially when it is difficult. Marcus's father, Robert, was equally supportive in his own quiet way. He was a man of few words but meaningful actions. When he learned that my own father had not committed to walking me down the aisle, Robert pulled me aside and offered to step in if needed. He said he would be honored to escort me, that any father who would not show up for his daughter did not deserve the title. I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed by his kindness. Here was a man who had known me for only a few years, yet he was more willing to be my father than the man who had raised me. The contrast was both heartbreaking and healing. 2 weeks before my rescheduled wedding, an unexpected call came from my mother. Her voice was different from the cold, distant tone I had grown accustomed to. There was an almost performative sweetness to it, an exaggerated warmth that immediately raised my suspicions. She said that she and my father wanted to do something special for me. They wanted to host a party, a gathering to introduce me to their friends before the wedding. She called it a gift, a peace offering of sorts. Despite everything, a small part of me still yearned for reconciliation. Marcus warned me to be careful, but I chose to see this as an opportunity for healing. I spent more money than I ever had on a single outfit. I found an elegant blue dress at a department store, something sophisticated enough to meet my mother's new standards while still feeling like myself. I had my hair styled professionally and even invested in new shoes that pinched my feet, but looked impressive. As I examined my reflection before leaving for the party, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I was dressing up to gain my parents' approval, becoming someone I was not to fit into their world. But I was willing to try. I was willing to meet them halfway if it meant salvaging our relationship. The mansion was more crowded than I expected. Over 100 guests filled the sprawling rooms, champagne glasses in hand, designer clothes, shimmering under crystal chandeliers. I recognized no one. These were not friends from my childhood, not relatives I had grown up with, not colleagues from my parents' former lives. These were strangers, wealthy strangers, who looked at me with polite curiosity and thinly veiled assessment. I felt like an exhibit at a museum, something to be observed and evaluated. My mother found me near the entrance and immediately began parading me through the crowd. Her introductions were strange and diminishing. She would say, "This is my daughter Hannah, she works in technology for now." The qualifier for now hung in the air after each introduction, implying that my career was a temporary phase rather than an accomplishment. She never mentioned that I was a software engineer at a respected company, that I had graduated with honors from a top university, that I had built my career through hard work and determination. To her new friends, I was just someone who had not yet figured out how to be properly wealthy. I encountered Bradley Thornton again near the bar. He approached with a smug smile, commenting that he had heard I was getting married to some teacher. His emphasis on the word teacher dripped with condescension. He mentioned that there was still time to make a better choice, gesturing vaguely at himself. I excused myself politely, my stomach churning with disgust. This was the caliber of man my parents wanted for me. Someone who measured worth in dollar signs and family names. Someone who could not fathom that love might exist independent of financial calculations. Two women near the buffet table caught my attention, not because they included me in their conversation, but because they did not realize I could hear them. One mentioned that she had heard the Whitmore daughter was marrying a schoolteacher. The other clicked her tongue sympathetically and said it was such a waste. They discussed me like I was not standing 15 feet away, like my choices were a tragedy to be mourned by strangers. I moved away before I could hear more, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to shed. I would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing me break. Midway through the evening, my father called for everyone's attention. He stood near the grand staircase, a champagne glass raised high, my mother by his side, looking resplendent in a gown that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. I expected a toast, perhaps some kind words about his daughter's upcoming nuptials, maybe even an olive branch extended after months of cold distance. I moved closer, my heart pounding with desperate hope. Maybe this was the moment everything would change. Maybe they had orchestrated this entire evening as an elaborate apology. My father began by thanking everyone for attending. He spoke about how grateful he and my mother were for their new community, their wonderful friends, their blessed lives. Then he turned his attention to me, and his expression shifted to something I can only describe as theatrical disappointment. He said he wanted to introduce his daughter Hannah, that it was regrettable she had chosen a different path than what they had hoped for her. My mother chimed in, saying they had tried to guide me, but apparently I preferred ordinary life to what they could offer. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Some guests shook their heads with exaggerated sympathy. Others exchanged knowing looks. I stood paralyzed as my parents publicly declared their disappointment in me before 100 strangers. Everything I had accomplished meant nothing to them. My degree, my career, my relationship, my values, all of it was fodder for their social performance. They were not introducing me. They were distancing themselves from me, making clear to their wealthy audience that my choices did not reflect their standards. I was being offered up as a cautionary tale, the daughter who refused to rise to her station. I tried to interject to defend myself, but my mother cut me off sharply. She told me not to make a scene and said I was embarrassing them. The word embarrassment echoed in my ears. I was their embarrassment. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had refused to become someone I was not. I felt tears threatening to spill over and began backing toward the door. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to escape this nightmare masquerading as a celebration. My father intercepted me before I reached the exit. He grabbed my arm and reached into his pocket. When his hand emerged, it held a crumpled $20 bill. He shoved it toward me with obvious contempt. He said I should take a taxi home since clearly I did not belong here. He told me to stop embarrassing the family. The bill fell at my feet when I did not reach for it. Laughter erupted around me. 100 strangers witnessing my parents literally throw money at me and tell me to leave. The humiliation was complete. I stared at the $20 lying on the marble floor, remembering how that same amount used to feel like a fortune in our little 2-bedroom house. Now it was being used as a weapon. For several heartbeats, I could not move. The laughter of strangers rang in my ears like a judgment from a jury of people who knew nothing about me. The $20 bill lay crumpled on the floor between my father and me, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. My mother stood a few steps behind him, her face carefully arranged into an expression of maternal concern that fooled no one who really knew her. I was supposed to pick up that money. I was supposed to slink away in shame. I was supposed to disappear quietly so they could continue their performance of wealthy respectability. I bent down slowly. Every eye in the room watched as my fingers closed around the bill. I straightened up, squared my shoulders, and looked directly into my father's eyes. Something shifted in me at that moment, a tectonic plate of self-worth that had been trembling, finally settling into place. I was not going to run. I was not going to hide. I was going to stand in my truth, even if it meant standing alone. I did not need a taxi, and I certainly did not need their approval anymore. My voice rang out clearer than I expected, cutting through the whispered conversations. I told the assembled guests that I wanted to apologize for interrupting their evening, but there were some things they deserved to know. My mother's face paled. My father reached for my arm, but I stepped back beyond his grasp. I began telling the story they had tried so hard to bury. I told them about my father, the man standing in his custom-tailored suit, pretending to be a lifelong businessman. I told them he was a plumber for over 25 years. The best plumber in Pittsburgh if you ask the people who knew him. His hands were calloused from honest work, and he could fix anything. I told them he taught me that integrity matters more than image, that hard work is its own reward. I watched his face as I spoke, seeing the flicker of shame he tried to hide. Then I spoke about my mother, the elegant woman in designer clothing who now associated only with society's elite. I told them she worked as a cashier at a supermarket for nearly 2 decades. She stood on her feet all day smiling at customers who barely noticed her bringing home dented cans and day-old bread to feed her family. She made those ingredients into meals filled with love. She taught me that kindness costs nothing, and that true wealth is measured in how we treat others. My mother's perfectly composed expression cracked slightly, her eyes glistening with something that might have been regret. I told the crowd about Pizza Fridays, our sacred tradition of making homemade pizza together every week, laughing and singing along to a radio that barely worked. I told them about the 2-bedroom house with a creaky porch where I learned what family really means. I told them that 3 years ago my parents won $12 million in the lottery, and they lost themselves completely. They traded everything real for everything hollow, and somehow decided that their own daughter was no longer good enough. The room had gone completely silent. No more tinkling champagne glasses, no more whispered judgments, like just 100 wealthy strangers staring at the daughter who refused to be discarded. I addressed my parents directly, asking them if they remembered what they used to tell me. That money cannot buy happiness. That family is everything. I asked them what happened to those people. What happened to the parents who would have given anything to see me happy, regardless of who I married or how much I earned? I announced to everyone present that I was a software engineer at one of Pittsburgh's leading technology firms. I had graduated with honors from Carnegie Mellon University on a full scholarship that I earned through hard work. I was about to marry a man named Marcus, a high school teacher who spent his days shaping young minds and his evenings volunteering in the community. He measured his success by the lives he touched, not the dollars in his account. And I was proud of him, prouder than I had ever been of anything in my life. Looking directly at my mother, I repeated the words she had spoken to me years ago in our tiny kitchen. She had told me I was her greatest pride because I had a good heart. I asked if she remembered saying that. Her hand flew to her mouth and tears began streaming down her face. For just a moment I saw a glimpse of the woman she used to be beneath all the pretension and designer clothing. But the moment passed, and she looked away. Just as I finished speaking, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Marcus walked through the door, followed by his parents, Linda and Robert, and his younger sister, Amy. They had come for me. Marcus must have sensed something was wrong when I did not text updates like I had promised. He crossed the room in long strides, his face a mixture of concern and determination. When he reached me, he took my hand and told me I did not need to take any taxi, that he was there to take me home. Linda approached my parents with a calm dignity that commanded respect. She said she did not know what money had done to them, but their daughter was one of the finest people she had ever known. She said they would be honored to have me as part of their family, even if my own parents could not see my worth. She told them that Hannah would always have a home with them. Robert stood behind his wife, his arms crossed, his expression making clear that he would protect me like his own child. Amy squeezed my shoulder in silent support. My father tried to speak, calling my name, but the word came out strangled and uncertain. He looked around at his wealthy guests, many of whom were now staring at him with entirely different expressions than before. The admiration and respect he had cultivated so carefully was evaporating in real time. He had been exposed not as the self-made success story he pretended to be, but as a man who had abandoned his own daughter for the approval of strangers. His social standing, the only thing he seemed to care about anymore, was crumbling around him. My mother was crying openly now, her mascara running in dark streams down her carefully made-up face. Some of her friends stepped away from her, as if her humiliation might be contagious. Others whispered behind their hands, no longer bothering to be subtle. The party she had orchestrated as a showcase of her new life had become the stage for her greatest shame. She had wanted to teach me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, she had revealed her own character to everyone she had spent 3 years trying to impress. I turned to leave with Marcus and his family, but paused at the door. I looked back at my parents one final time. I told them I still loved them because they were my parents, and that would never change. But I did not need their approval to live my life or find my happiness. I said that the door would always be open if they decided to remember who they really were. Then I walked out of that mansion, Marcus's hand warm in mine, into a night that felt more like freedom than I had experienced in years. 2 weeks later, Marcus and I were married in a small garden ceremony that was everything I had dreamed it would be. 50 guests gathered on a beautiful autumn afternoon, surrounded by chrysanthemums and maple trees blazing with color. There was no extravagant venue, no celebrity caterer, no $100,000 budget. There was just love, pure and simple, witnessed by the people who truly mattered to us. My parents were not invited. After the scene at their party, I knew I needed space to heal before I could consider rebuilding that relationship. I did not make the decision out of spite or revenge. I made it to protect myself on one of the most important days of my life. I could not risk them causing another scene, turning my wedding into another opportunity for their social performance. Marcus supported my decision completely, as he supported everything else about me. The ceremony took place in the backyard of Marcus's parents' home. Robert had built a beautiful wooden arch himself, staying up late for weeks to carve intricate designs into the frame. Linda had arranged the flowers, calling in favors from friends who worked at nurseries and florists. Amy served as my maid of honor, joking that she had always wanted a sister, and now she was officially getting one. Every detail was personal. Every element was meaningful. There was not a single generic or pretentious moment in the entire celebration. When it came time to walk down the aisle, I did not walk alone. Linda took one arm and Robert took the other. They escorted me toward Marcus, who stood waiting with tears streaming down his face. In his vows, he said something I will carry with me forever. He said I had taught him that family is not about the people you are born to, but the people who choose to love you. He said he was choosing me not just for that day, but for every day that followed. He promised to stand beside me through whatever challenges life brought, to be my partner and my best friend and my home. The reception was catered by Marcus's cousins, who ran a small restaurant in the city. His aunt had made the cake a towering creation of vanilla and buttercream that tasted like heaven. Our first dance was to a song that had been playing on that old radio during one of our earliest dates, a melody neither of us could name, but both of us remembered. We danced on the grass as fireflies began to emerge in the gathering dusk. It was magical in the only way that matters, genuinely and authentically. In the months that followed, I allowed myself to grieve the parents I had lost. Not to death, but to something equally final. The mother who used to hold me when I cried had become someone who threw money at me and called me an embarrassment. The father who used to tell terrible jokes had become someone who measured people by their net worth. I mourned them as if they had died, because in many ways they had. The people I remembered existed only in memories now preserved in photographs and fading sensations that grew more distant with each passing year. I found healing in unexpected places. My work became more fulfilling as I threw myself into projects that challenged and excited me. I received a promotion, then another climbing the ladder through merit rather than connections. My relationship with Marcus deepened in ways I had not known were possible. We supported each other through difficult days and celebrated each other's victories. We built traditions of our own, including a new version of Pizza Friday that honored my past while creating our future. The pizza never tasted quite like my mother's, but it was ours. I began volunteering as a mentor for young women in STEM fields, many of whom came from backgrounds similar to my own. Girls who had been told they were not smart enough or wealthy enough or connected enough to succeed. I shared my story with them, showing them that obstacles could be overcome with determination and hard work. Some of them reminded me of myself at their age, hungry for opportunity and desperate to prove their worth. Helping them gave my own journey deeper meaning. A year after the wedding, Marcus and I welcomed our daughter into the world. We named her Linda, after the woman who had stepped in as my mother when my own mother stepped away. Baby Linda had Marcus's eyes and my stubbornness, a combination that promised interesting years ahead. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I made a silent promise. I would never let money change who I was or how I loved. My daughter would grow up knowing that her worth was not measured in dollars or social status, but in the kindness of her heart and the strength of her character. My parents reached out 2 years after the party that had ended everything. They had lost most of their money through bad investments and schemes promoted by the very friends they had chosen over me. The wealthy social circle they had pursued so desperately had abandoned them the moment their accounts ran dry. They wanted to reconcile. They wanted to meet their granddaughter. They wanted forgiveness. I agreed to see them not because I had forgotten what they had done, but because holding on to anger was exhausting. We met at a coffee shop neutral territory for this cautious reunion. They looked older than I remembered, diminished somehow, without the armor of their wealth. My mother cried when she saw Linda reaching out to touch her granddaughter's tiny fingers. My father sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet my gaze. The reconciliation was slow and incomplete. Some wounds are too deep to heal fully, and trust once broken takes years to rebuild. I allowed them into my life again, but in limited doses. They attended birthday parties and holiday dinners, behaving like guests rather than the commanding parental presences they once were. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the child seeking their approval. I was the adult deciding how much access to grant them, setting boundaries to protect myself and my family. They never fully returned to who they had been before the lottery. The experience had changed them permanently, revealing aspects of their characters that perhaps had always existed beneath the surface. But occasionally, in rare moments, I caught glimpses of my old parents. A joke from my father that sounded like his younger self. A gesture of genuine affection from my mother that felt unscripted. Those moments were bittersweet gifts, reminders of what we had lost, and small hints of what might still be salvageable. Looking back on that night at the mansion, I no longer feel the burning humiliation that once consumed me. Instead, I feel something closer to gratitude. That $20 bill thrown at my feet became the catalyst for my liberation. It forced me to confront the truth about my parents and, more importantly, the truth about myself. I was not defined by their approval or their disappointment. I was defined by my own choices, my own values, my own capacity for love. Or the last time I saw my parents was at Linda's 3rd birthday party held in our modest backyard with streamers and balloons and a cake I had made myself. My mother watched me interact with my daughter, saw the easy joy between us, and something shifted in her expression. She pulled me aside and told me she was sorry. Not the performative apologies she'd offered before, but something deeper and rawer. She said she had spent so many years trying to become someone important that she had forgotten she already was someone important. She was a mother, and she had failed at the only job that truly mattered. I did not know what to say. There were no words adequate for 3 years of pain compressed into a single moment of acknowledgement. So I simply nodded and hugged her, feeling the bones beneath her designer dress thinner and more fragile than I remembered. My father joined us, wrapping his arms around both of us, in an embrace that felt like a shadow of the bear hugs from my childhood. It was not healing, not completely, but it was a start. If there is one thing I have learned from this journey, it is that money reveals character rather than creating it. The capacity for love and the capacity for cruelty exist within all of us. Wealth simply amplifies what is already there. My parents had goodness in them, genuine goodness that had sustained our family through decades of struggle. But they also had insecurities and fears that money exposed and exploited. The lottery did not change who they were. It showed them a version of themselves they had never been forced to confront. I think about that often when I look at my own life. Marcus and I are comfortable now. My career has flourished, and his teaching position comes with steady benefits. We are not wealthy by the standards of my parents' former circle, but we have everything we need. More importantly, we have perspective. We know that our happiness comes from each other, from our daughter, from the community of friends and family we have built. If we won the lottery tomorrow, I would like to believe we would remain unchanged. But I would also be vigilant, watching for the subtle ways that money can corrupt even the best intentions. That $20 bill still exists. I kept it tucked away in a drawer with other meaningful objects from my past. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, feeling the creases where it was crumpled in my father's fist, before being thrown at my feet. It serves as a reminder, not of humiliation, but of liberation. That was the moment I stopped seeking validation from people incapable of giving it. That was the moment I realized that my worth was not determined by my parents' acceptance. That was the moment I began building a life based on authenticity rather than approval. To anyone watching this who has experienced something similar, who has felt the sting of rejection from people who should have loved you unconditionally, I want you to know that you are not alone. Families are complicated. Money complicates them further. Sometimes the people who raised you become unrecognizable strangers, wearing familiar faces. It hurts in ways that are difficult to describe. But you will survive. You will find your people the ones who choose to love you without conditions or qualifications. They are out there waiting, and when you find them, everything will make sense. My parents threw $20 at me and told me to take a taxi. They thought they were putting me in my place. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about hierarchy and status. But the only lesson I learned that night was about freedom. The freedom to walk away from toxicity. The freedom to define my own worth. The freedom to build a family based on love rather than obligation. They meant to diminish me. Instead, they set me free. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment where money changed the people you loved? Have you found healing after family rejection? Share your experiences and let us support each other. Please like this video if it touched your heart and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about resilience and redemption. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they are worthy of love exactly as they are. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the people who push you away are actually pushing you toward the life you were always meant to live. Take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter. Until next time.